Welcome to Global Perspectives. What is the difference between weather and climate? For answers, we turn to Steve Bowen with Aon Benfield.
Global Perspectives with Pulitzer Prize-winning commentator John Bercia.
Welcome to the show, Steve.
Thank you very much for having me.
Talking about weather and climate, a lot of people roll them together and think they're essentially the same thing. Help us understand why they're different and how it affects your work. You're trained as a meteorologist, you work in the insurance business. Tell us about the difference between the two.
Sure. So there's many different kind of fun, unique phrases to kind of help identify the two. One of my favorite ones is weather is your mood, climate is your personality. So essentially meaning that climate is the average weather that you would typically expect over a longer period of time, things that have happened that have been averaged out over the course of several decades. We use different time frame as a benchmark essentially going forward. Weather is essentially what's happening today. Outside, say it's 85 degrees and sunny, that's what's going on in the present, and that's current, so that's the weather. Now, how that's important for the insurance industry is we're always trying to identify, different levels of risk. And when we're looking at weather in the present day, we're trying to really prepare and understand, what our clients are potentially going to be facing in the short term. Now, when we compare that to the climate, that's when we get into more of the actuarial point of view, where we're looking in the future, trying to predict based on the past. And that's very important from insurance when you're really trying to establish some of the rates, and there's a lot of folks that do that. And so differentiating between the two is important in terms of what's actually going on right now, trying to identify, in the sense of, say, a hurricane is about to come ashore, and you have claims assessors that are put into place to be able to assess in the aftermath, in the immediate aftermath of an event, to help our clients and folks without the industry to be able to get on their feet as quickly as possible. So there's a pretty significant difference between the two.
How did you get into all of this? Did you wake up one day when you were small and decide you wanted to be a meteorologist, or did that come gradually over time?
Well, I think similarly to most people that want to become a meteorologist, it happens quite young. For me, I was 8 or 9 years old. I was living in Indiana, and we had a weak tornado come down our street and did some damage, and I was utterly fascinated and amazed by the power of Mother Nature, and that fascination stayed with me to this day. And I eventually went to Florida State University and got my bachelor's degree in meteorology, and initially my first career was in television. I was over in Tampa doing some weather forecasting in real time, and then I decided to transition out, and I decided to go a different angle, which was in the insurance realm. And oftentimes that surprises people, but the whole realm of meteorology is becoming very important, not just for TV, but for a lot of the private sector industries, things you wouldn't even imagine. There are sports teams that even hire meteorologists. So it was a different route. It was very interesting. I in the process of all this and dealing with a lot of data and numbers, and we briefly talked about doing some trend analyses with things. I went back and I got my master's in business analytics from the University of Notre Dame. And so it really helped to sort of tie everything together in dealing with the weather, climate, and trying to identify some of the trends as, working within the insurance industry and trying to help our clients better understand their risks.
So you come into this with far more background than the average person, not just in the insurance industry, but across the board. What do you do to inform yourself? You already have this great base of knowledge. You're trying to stay current with what seems to me to be a rapidly changing environment that makes things really hard to predict. How do you stay current? Where do you go for forecasts that you believe in and so forth?
Well, for me, my base is always with any agency from NOAA. I mean, they hire the best meteorologists in the business, the best climatologists. They're the keepers of the data, essentially. So they're always at the forefront of any analyses and any just really important information in real time to help us really prepare for, what I do every day, and, really kind of put things into perspective, so to speak. And then I rely very heavily on academia. There's a lot of very important papers that are released in journals that are pretty much almost entirely based on the data that comes out of NOAA. As you said, things are really changing. There's a lot of new things that are coming to light. As the technology improves, as the data quality improves, we're starting to get a much better idea as to what to expect in some of these things. In terms of hurricanes, the National Hurricane Center has gotten tremendously better in terms of track forecasting, the cone of uncertainty, which everyone focuses on. If you compare that to, say, 2005, that has really narrowed quite a bit. So we're getting a much better understanding at a longer time frame to understand sort of what to expect going forward. Now, with that said, there are things such as intensity forecasting, which still has quite a bit ways to go. The computers are getting much better in terms of being able to interpret these tremendous amounts of data that goes into these computer models, which are all based on mathematical formulas, and they're all spitting out different types of solutions. But there's still some factors such as rapid intensification cycles or eye-wall replacement cycles where you get these wild fluctuations in intensity, which are still very, very hard for forecasters to understand. So there's a lot of literature that helps me to be able to understand and be able to communicate that to our clients in the industry. There's still a long ways to go, but if you look past even 10 years, we've come a very, very long way.
The average viewer of the show may not have your background or desire to get deeply into the subject matter, but in terms of accessing something that is easy to read, easy to understand, what would you recommend?
Well, again, I keep going back to NOAA, and they have done a really good job, especially in the past couple of years, in terms of what I like to call Fisher pricing the science, because as you said, the scientific community is fairly small, and people talk at a very high level in terms of the understanding and the terminology. And one of the things that really has improved, especially in the past couple of years, is trying to talk at a level that everyone can understand, because communication is so critically important when folks are trying to understand and whether they need to evacuate, what type of impacts they may be sustaining with an oncoming event. This past year, the National Hurricane Center, I keep using them as an example because they've been a very, very important agency. What they've been doing in their forecast discussions is they keep the higher level sort of background science as to what's happening with the storm. But at the very end, they have a segment called Key Messages, and it really does simplify in essentially bullet points what major impacts may be experienced from the storm. And everything from your local news, even posts you get on social media from the Weather Channel, all of that information is based on the National Hurricane Center. And I think that they are really getting a much better understanding that they are the primary source. And so they're starting to, even on their social media channels, put out information, as I mentioned, with the bullets, but also in graphical form to really help sort of reinforce those most important points in terms of helping people prepare for pending disaster.
Where would you rather be in a hurricane, either pre, during, or post, observing it from a distance, or there because you can actually appreciate exactly what's happening on the ground? And I know that may not seem like a fair question because most people go in the opposite direction of danger, but you're in the business, so you probably enjoy actually being there.
I would say if you asked me that question 10 years ago, I probably would give you a much different answer. I've seen tornadoes live. I've been through hurricanes. They're fascinating. As a scientist, you want to be able to be close up front, get a better understanding, and experience what, the fury of Mother Nature, so to speak. But today, in my current role, I do a lot of post-event damage surveying, which means I'm on the ground following events within a matter of weeks. And when you've been through communities that have been devastated, entire neighborhoods that have been flattened by EF5 tornadoes or Category 4 hurricanes, and you really see the devastation, it really does humble you, and it really puts into perspective that there's people associated with this. I oftentimes will say on some of my social media postings, I'll say this is a beautiful looking storm, but the more beautiful the storm tends to mean the more devastating effects on land. Because the more organized, the more impressive looking things, if they get into populated areas, the level of devastation is tremendous. So, like I said, it splits a lot of scientists in trying to not be overwhelmed by the beauty of Mother Nature, but understanding that Mother Nature is really powerful and destructive.
And you've had the opportunity to witness for yourself the aftermath of several of the major storms of the 2017 season. Not talking about the insurance aspects, but in terms of your personal reaction to those, whether it was Harvey or Irma, and I don't want to put you in storms where you didn't go, but I believe you were in the aftermath of both of those, and others. What was your reaction? I mean, you were just talking about the human impact. Was it even worse to see it in person than to hear about it, and did that affect you in some way?
Absolutely. I mean, I would say, taking a step back, the most powerful thing that I've seen doing the post-surveying was in Moore, Oklahoma in 2013. There was an EF5 tornado that tore through the city, and it leveled an elementary school, and there was several children that perished, and that truly humbles you. In terms of the 2017 hurricane season, Harvey sort of took my breath away in terms of the size and scope of the damage. I mean, the flood footprint in particular was just seemingly never-ending. You'd just go through neighborhood after neighborhood, and it was entire contents of homes out on the front yard. I think one of the things that came out of Harvey for me was just how destructive water can be. Most of the structures that we saw were largely intact. In Houston, the storm had weakened to tropical storm status, but it sat there for multiple days, and you had cases of upwards of 5 feet of rainfall, which is unprecedented on so many different levels. But you saw just tremendous flooding, and even in instances where homes were elevated to meet certain housing requirements based on FEMA flood maps, just a matter of inches getting into your home can mean entire loss of contents, and that's very humbling, especially when you talk to homeowners who talk about, they opened the door and multiple feet of floodwaters came in the home, and they had to protect. There's one gentleman who had to protect his wife from the refrigerator in the kitchen because the refrigerator was picked up by water, and it pinned her against the wall. So, it really puts into perspective all this. And working within the insurance industry, I mean, it helps provide, not necessarily being more humble, but it helps put in better perspective for us to help people in their most times of need.
I'm not asking this question in a sarcastic way, but if floodwaters are knocking at the door, should you open it?
Well, it was a question that I asked him as well. And the fact of the matter is the water was rising so much that the water was either going to smash through the window, or he was going to open the door and try to, prevent there from being, even more catastrophic damage with glass being shattered coming in. So his thought process was, I'm going to open the door, let the water in, and maybe it'll lower a little bit. But the people really underestimate the power of water, and I think a lot of the focus with hurricanes are people focus too much on the category. They think of the wind. They say, oh well, it's just a Category 1 storm. I don't need to evacuate just because it's only a Cat 1. But you're only taking into account part of the system, essentially meaning that if you have a storm like Harvey or Tropical Storm Allison in 2001, where the system sits over the course of multiple days, and if we're talking rainfall not in a matter of inches but in a matter of feet, that's an entirely different ballgame. So, and then if you're along the coastline, obviously there's the storm surge component to all this as well. So I think people really need to be taking into account all aspects of the risk from tropical cyclone, and they are immense and they can be very extensive.
Well, we saw in Harvey this, as you said, an immense precipitation phenomenon. Is there any community that can take 50 to 60 inches of precipitation? I know this was unusually bad because of the geography, but even areas that are more rolling would certainly have a gigantic problem with that level of precipitation.
Absolutely, and we heard repeatedly from officials in Houston that basically said Harvey was beyond any worst case scenario that they ever planned for. And an area like in Houston, Texas, and then also across the state of Florida, where we're seeing tremendous population growth, we're seeing exposure growth. There's so many more properties that are vulnerable to these disasters. And basically, we're changing on a daily basis the terrain around, and water has to go everywhere. So when we're talking about multiple feet of water, and especially in Houston, where there's a lot of concrete, the type of soil is very clay-based. It doesn't absorb water very well. that water is going to accumulate very quickly, and it's going to try to find some place to go. And there's so many more people there now, and you know, there was so much water that it really overwhelmed even the areas that had the best levels of drainage. So really tough situation.
So how do you advise people to protect themselves better against these threats going forward? What are the kinds of things we can do as individuals, as communities, to ensure that we're as safe as possible against this ever-changing threat?
Well, I think, you know, taking a very broad look at all of this, I would say that when hurricane season starts, you should be preparing. You essentially should have some kit, you should have a plan in place just in case the worst case scenario does end up occurring. From an insurance point of view, I would say that the best recommendation I can provide is take pictures and movies of your stuff. Because if something happens and you do have a lot of damage, oftentimes you're not going to be able to find everything, and things may be thrown out all over the neighbor's yard or even further away. So document the things that you have all of your paperwork in a place where you can easily access it. Essentially, you're trying to minimize your own risk, because when things are really bad, it's crazy, it's hectic, you're going to forget something. So the more you can plan ahead is certainly the better.
What you talked about the aftermath of a tornado. Was that the worst thing you ever experienced, or was there something else that was worse in some ways for you personally?
I tell you, I'll go back to the EF5 tornado and more. I mean, walking around some of the neighborhoods, it really felt like being on the set of a Hollywood movie. It was so quiet, very still. There were literally vehicles up in trees, 2x4s that were jammed through concrete. You know, people don't realize that in terms of a wind speed basis, tornadoes are much more powerful than hurricanes are. They're just on a much more smaller scale. But in terms of the intensity of the event per square mile or parameter you'd like to use, the damage is often off the charts, because you can see homes flattened and removed all the way down to the foundation. So I would say that the EF5 tornado is really bad. Wildfire is also particularly bad, just from the sense that it moves so quickly, and fire, unlike other perils where there may be some damage and you can salvage some contents, oftentimes with fire everything is burned and it's just a pile of ash. So that's also a very dangerous, very I would say humbling peril to deal with.
You work for an international company. I would imagine potentially you could be sent anywhere where they have business. Are there some countries that experience particular types of phenomena that you would like to visit and see in terms of the aftermath, just to Sure. add to your knowledge base?
Yeah, I would say, obviously in parts of Asia there's elevated earthquake risk. Even within the past 15 to 20 years, there's been two, unbelievable tsunami events. We had Tohoku, Japan in 2011, and then the Indonesia event in 2004. Seeing that level of tsunami damage, I think, would be very interesting. There's obviously a specific threat in the United States up in Cascadia. If that fault line were ever to go, there would be a tremendous risk of tsunami and earthquake-related damage in the Pacific Northwest and also around Vancouver, Canada. So I would say earthquake is certainly one peril that I haven't seen up close in terms of widespread damage, but that would be certainly one. I would say severe weather, the severe convective storm peril, in terms of hail. It's a very costly and damaging peril in Australia, also in South Africa. I think it would be very interesting, to travel and see how there's different building codes and how different structures perform based on how we see it here in the U.S. So there's so many different types of disasters. You mentioned, working for an international company and having to focus daily on what's going on in the world. There's always something going on. It's never a dull day. There's always something new and something, something that our clients need to know about. So I'm always having to be on top of everything.
Is it your sense that we're developing a stronger ability to evaluate, analyze, and so forth these phenomena, even though they are in some ways becoming harder to assess because of technology and other advances.
Yeah, I think we're getting a much better understanding as to what's causing the peril. The technology and the quality of data is allowing a lot of what we do is based on computer model output, and we're able to put the data in and get these results, and being able to look at hypothetical events. And then also historical events. If we had them occur today, we would have a much better understanding as to the overall magnitude of what could happen. But as I mentioned before, there's still a long ways to go. I think that as we continue to go forward, as the technology gets better, as the data gets better, I think we're going to be able to help people have a longer I would say a waiting period in terms of understanding and knowing when the event's going to come, in terms of preparation and being ready to go when the big event comes.
I'm curious, you've worked in journalism, you worked in the insurance sector. When you travel to these places, you're obviously accruing a photographic record of things, some for business reasons, but maybe some for personal. Is there a book that's emerging in all of this potentially for you?
Well, I'm young enough where I would hope that I'll have many more experiences to put everything together. But it really is sort of a mental story. A lot of times when I'm talking to folks like yourself or to clients or just friends and family, I can always sort of go back and recite something that I saw. Oh, hey, I remember seeing that wildfire damage in Colorado in 2012, or I saw this in Florida with Irma in 2017. So, there's a lot of stories that one could tell. I don't know if I'm going to actually put it together into a book, but that's certainly a possibility. But I think is you do more of this, and there's many folks within the insurance industry and other sectors that are constantly studying and understanding and trying to really get a better grip and trying to figure it out and trying to help people prepare for the level of risk. And I keep using the word risk, but as more people are continuing to move into more vulnerable locations, people may not be aware of the risk that they're moving into. So the more experiences that I have and others have that we can communicate that risk to folks, they're hopefully going to be prepared, and they're going to feel like that they can at least acknowledge the risk that they might face.
But people historically have always congregated by the water, whether it was an ocean or a lake or a stream or something else. It was just easier for resources, for travel, and everything else just seemed to make sense to locate near water. Is it possible that we're going into a period of time when that may not be the location of choice because of all the danger? I mean, I'm thinking of sea level rise and
Sure.
and the increasing frequency and intensity of these storms, and on and on and on. It makes you wonder, should I have that beach house?
Well, like you said, people want to live in the sexiest places, and that tends to be with the ocean view. But I think what's going to have to happen is that when plans are made to develop, you're going to have to start elevating your home. You mentioned sea level rise. Since 1993, the rate of sea level rise has doubled. And when you get hurricane events, I mean, you just assume that there's, say, a couple of inches every couple of years of rise. That's another couple of inches that's going to continue to rise and aggregate over multiple decades, and then we're getting into feet. So in terms of planning, yes, there's going to have to be a lot of planning that goes into ensuring that if people really want to buy and live there, they're going to have to build to something that's going to protect them, because at some point someone's going to have to come save them if they're living in these risky areas. And as more people continue to do that and the homes become more expensive, that adds a really complex layer.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Steve Bowen.
Thank you.
And thank you. For Global Perspectives, I'm John Bercia. We'll see you next time.